All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Zaxtor99, the narrator for these Chillers short stories in this series that I started. And now we're going to go ahead and start with my next Chillers story from the No Sleep section over on Reddit. Now, these are stories that really remind me a lot of like watching those old school like 1950s and 1960s Twilight Zone episodes, the black and white ones on TV by Rod Serling. I used to love those, and a lot of these little stories that I'm picking out here kind of remind me a lot of some of those. I'm really enjoying reading them. I'm hoping you guys are enjoying listening to my new Chiller series. And if you guys have written a no sleep short story over on Reddit, or you know of one, please email me at chillersubmission@yahoo.com. I'll read all these emails from that email address right there. And if you've written it yourself, obviously give me permission to read it on my new Chiller series, and it just might be chosen for a future Chillers episode. So I do want to go and thank you guys for watching this. Let me know, what you think of this particular story in this episode tonight. And remember, if you know of a great story over there on No Sleep that would make a great Chillers episode, let me know at chillersubmission@yahoo.com. Without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and start this next Chillers episode. This story is by Horror Junkie 123, who gave me permission to read his short story, and it's called My Son Told Me That He Ate His Teacher. I'm starting to believe him. "Hey kiddo, how was school?" I asked, as Dylan trudged through the door. I received no response, just a shrug as he tossed his backpack aside. That type of behavior had become increasingly more common since his father had walked out on us just 3 months prior. I had come to expect a bit of a struggle when it came to opening up to me, but his refusal to make any eye contact indicated that something was wrong. "Dylan, did something happen at school today?" He meekly glanced up at me, swinging his foot back and forth. "Yeah." "What was it, sweetie? You can always tell me if something's bothering you." He muttered under his breath, shifting his gaze to the floor. "Oh, I'm sorry, honey. What was that?" "I ate my teacher, Miss Hollingsworth. I ate her, Mom." I was momentarily stunned. What kind of weird confession was that? I was expecting him to tell me that he flunked a math test or got a conduct mark. It was totally out of left field, and I was at a loss for words. Why did you do that?" I replied, opting to just play along. This had to be some type of a game. He bit his lip at this, and I could see tears welling in his eyes. "I forgot to write my spelling words, so Miss Hollingsworth gave me more homework." I crossed my arms. Well then, it sounds to me like Miss Hollingsworth had it coming. "Go get a jump on today's assignment so you don't have to eat any more teachers, all right?" Dylan's face lit up like a firework on the 4th of July. "Okay, I will. Thanks for not being mad at me, Mom," he said, grabbing his backpack as he bolted to his room. "What am I going to do with that boy?" I chuckled, turning my attention back to the pot roast simmering on the stove. The next day, I had to drop Dylan off at school myself. For the first time ever, he had missed the bus. I really didn't mind taking him. It would give me a chance to ask Miss Hollingsworth if she knew anything about his odd revelation. But Miss Hollingsworth wasn't there. She had a substitute filling in for her today. I thought it was a strange coincidence, but nothing to worry about. Surely she was just sick today, right? Now, I'm starting to think that's not the case. I was again in the kitchen cooking dinner when I heard the familiar slam of the front door and little feet darting down the hall. "Hey, buddy." Silence. Nothing, aside from the door to Dylan's room clicking shut. Odd, but not too out of the ordinary. At least, not until supper. "Dylan, it's time for dinner." "Just a second." "No, food's ready now. Come get it." "I said just a second." My blood began to boil. Who the hell did he think he was talking to? I marched up to Dylan's door and threw it open, exposing him playing a new video game. "Dylan Lane Webster, you listen. No, Jessica, you listen to me." My blood turned ice. Dylan had never addressed me by my first name before. His voice was suddenly so deep and sinister. When my son turned to face me, I didn't recognize the eyes that locked with mine. Leave me alone, or I will consume you, mind, body, and soul, just like I did to your husband. All the blood rushed from my face, and I felt as if I was going to pass out. Did I hear that correctly? What did you say? I squeaked, my voice shaky and uneven now. Dylan didn't respond. He just kept battling his way through the digital zombies on the television screen. I stumbled away, afraid that I was going to faint. I made it to the sofa in the living room, fighting through tears and through the nauseating feeling in my gut now. Dylan's strange confession suddenly didn't feel like a quirky little game anymore. Once I managed to ground myself in reality, I determined that I needed to know. If eating people was jargon for some other method of making them disappear, I was going to get to the bottom of it. I raced to my bedroom and began rifling through the drawer of my bedside table. I tossed aside trinkets of papers until I found what I was looking for. The note from the day that John had left. I kept it just in case I needed it for legal proceedings. And in that moment, I thanked my lucky stars that I did. I turned on the lamp by the bed and began inspecting the note. My heart dropped when I noticed it. It was just what I was afraid of. The letter had been hastily scrawled in Dylan's handwriting. My head spun violently as I compared the note to a letter that Dylan had penned a few months prior, and there was no mistaking it. My husband didn't write that note. My son did. I began to hyperventilate as the weight of the implications bore down on me. This was all too crazy to wrap my head around. My husband, the man whom I had built a life with for over 10 years, might not have walked out on me, actually. It was just too much to process. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, sunlight was flooding into my eyes and I could feel little fingers tugging at my blouse. Mommy, Mommy, I missed the bus again. Can you take me? I groggily opened my eyes and glanced at the alarm clock. 7:45 a.m. I shot up from bed, trying to get my bearings. I'd been knocked out for a whole 12 hours. How the hell was that even possible? I didn't have time to mull it over now. I ushered Dylan out of the room while I raced around like a bat out of hell. Come on, buddy. Mommy overslept, I said, emerging with the top halfway on 5 minutes later. All the while, Dylan stood there, quiet as a church mouse. We were only 15 minutes late. Not too bad, all things considering. I peered through the door to Dylan's class when I dropped him off, and Miss Hollingsworth still wasn't there. That was enough to bring all the events from the night prior crashing to the forefront of my mind now. That was right. I was looking into my husband's disappearance. I flew home to go over the evidence once more. I made it back in record time, and I immediately started searching for the note that I had discovered the night before. But now it was gone. I searched up and down for it, in the drawer, under the bed. I even rifled through all the trash cans. Nothing. I knew for a fact that I hadn't thrown it out. So did Dylan take it? That was the only logical explanation. He must have disposed of the letter to erase any proof of his wrongdoing. That, or I was just simply starting to lose it. I honestly couldn't tell which was worse. I took a series of deep breaths and closed my eyes. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't sure if I had the resolve to go through with it. I unlocked my phone and thumbed through the contacts, pausing when I reached the name I was searching for. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long time before I finally pressed it. My heart jackhammered in my chest with every ring. And just when I thought it was going to voicemail, he answered. Hello? Hi, Miss Daniels, it's Jess. I could hear an audible groan from the other end of the line. What do you want? I wanted to just snap back at her for every fiber of my being, but fortunately, I managed to keep my composure. I was just wondering if you had heard from John recently. He hasn't been home in a few days. And she scoffed. I ain't heard from that boy since his papa's funeral. No thanks to you. Okay, that's all I needed, thanks. I hung up before she could get another word in. John's mother really didn't like me, but she was the only one I could have asked. His father had passed away when he was in college, and he had no other living relatives to speak of. It was beginning to dawn on me that John might not have left on his own free will a few months back. He worked from home and only hung out with his friends every few months or so. His employer had probably assumed that he found another job and that going ghost was the way of submitting his resignation. John was the type of person who could disappear and no one would bat an eye. No one except for me. I was fairly certain that if Dylan didn't directly cause my husband's disappearance, he had a hand in it at the very least. And I was starting to think that my outlandish theory about eating people being code for something wasn't so crazy after all. Still, though, I needed evidence. I was going to have to catch Dylan in the act. I decided that my best course of action would be to keep a close eye on him while I could brainstorm a bit more of a concrete plan. I had to be cautious about things so that he wouldn't follow through on his threat. When Dylan arrived home from school, I put on my best poker face. A whirlwind of emotions surged through me, but I kept repeating to myself that I only needed to stick it out just a little bit longer. Little did I know that sentiment would hold more truth than I ever thought it would have. Hey, buddy, how was your day? I asked, beaming at my son as he trudged through the door. It was good, Mommy. Can we go to the park later, pretty please? My friend wants to meet me there. I eyed him skeptically. Oh, yeah? And who might this friend be? Gillen glanced down and shoved his hands into his pocket. His name's Josh. You don't know him. On the playground. Please, Mommy. I really want to go, Gillen insisted, grabbing my hand with his little fingers and staring up at me with his pleading eyes. I pretended to mull it over, shifting my gaze to the ceiling. Okay, we can go, but only after you finish your homework. Deal? Deal, you're the best, he shouted before darting off to his room. Perfect. This would give me a chance to observe Dylan's behavior around other kids. It felt wrong to be going behind my own son's back like that, but I had to get to the bottom of things here. Dylan and I left for the park around 5 o'clock, and when we arrived, a handful of children were already romping around the playground. Once we were within view, a boy with sandy hair and a gap-toothed grin waved Dylan over. My son gave me a quick glance before darting off to meet his friend. I claimed a seat on an empty bench and pulled a book out of my purse. I must have let myself get sucked in because when I looked up, I experienced every parent's worst nightmare. I couldn't find Dylan anywhere. I leapt up from the bench and hurriedly scanned the playground, but he was nowhere in sight. Dylan! Dylan, where are you? I yelled, my heart thundering in my chest. While I was suspicious of him, Dylan was still my own son, and he was my entire world, and I would be absolutely devastated if anything had happened to him. I rushed over to the nearest adults and pleaded with them to help me. Fortunately, they were a sweet elderly couple watching their granddaughter swing on the monkey bars. I am sorry to bother you, but I can't find my son. His name is Dylan, and he's about this tall with brown hair and blue eyes. I'm pretty sure he has a Reptar shirt on. Have you seen him? The old woman innocently met my gaze and returned a warm smile. As a matter of fact, I have. That wouldn't happen to be him over there, would it? She asked, pointing to a nearby tree line. And she was right. There was Dylan, leading his new friend into the woods. Oh, thank you so much, I said, before trotting over to the trees. Why was Dylan going in there? He was never one to venture off without my permission. I followed the duo into the underbrush. I was about to call Dylan's name to get him to come back. Whatever was going on, I wanted to be part of it. But in the end, my curiosity won out. I tailed behind the boys, keeping a safe distance and ensuring it didn't make too much noise. They paused in a clearing, and I watched as Dylan surveyed his surroundings. I quickly ducked behind a bush, barely escaping from his line of sight. I had to work to strike my breathing. A feeling of dread had settled down in my stomach. My intuition was telling me that something sinister was about to happen. I peeked my head out from my hiding spot, and I nearly passed out right there. I stayed crouched, just frozen in terror, as my son pushed Josh to the ground with a strength I didn't know he was capable of. He loomed over him and whispered something inaudible. And then his jaw unhinged like an anaconda and began to stretch, wider and wider and wider, until his mouth was nearly the size of a toddler. I simply couldn't believe what I was seeing. Josh was visibly shaking. The poor boy was paralyzed and unable to tear his eyes away from the twisted scene before him. And then, without any warning, Gillen pounced on him. He grabbed Josh and shoved his head inside his gaping maw. He fed his body through the opening, swallowing him inch by inch. The child's guttural shrieks resonated in my ears, growing more and more muffled with each passing second. Once Josh's shoes had disappeared down Dylan's throat, his mouth returned to its normal size, and what he did next will haunt me for the rest of my life. Without turning around, Dylan calmly said,
Mommy, if you tell anyone about what you just saw, you will be my next meal.